Thanks again for joining us. Today's webinar on how to build regulated workloads on the cloud with AWS and AWS Partner Network partners. So my name is Chris Wally, and I lead our industry compliance team here in the AWS Partner Network, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. Joining me are a good array of partners as well as a customer, all focused on GXP. And I'll start off by introducing Roland Smith, who's our Senior Director of Digital GXP Systems at Moderna Therapeutics. We also are joined by Joe Miles, our Global Vice President of Life Sciences at SAP. Also joining us are Nathan Wallace, the founder and CEO of Turbot. And finally, Michael Crowthers, a Senior Manager from Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory, is joining us. So thanks to all our panelists today. I'll speak briefly to the agenda. So we'll talk through about how AWS supports regulated workloads in the cloud. We'll highlight how Moderna Therapeutics is using GXP workloads on AWS, and then we'll have a discussion from our AWS partners, the compliance experts from SAP, Deloitte, and Turbot. And what we hope you get out of this, the learning objectives for today, are really to kind of examine at a high level some best practices for establishing and developing GXP workloads on AWS. Also understanding methods for building secure cloud solutions while also managing quality controls and meeting regulatory requirements. And finally, we'll learn how to take advantage of the benefits of cloud computing for regulated workloads. I'll kick things off with a brief intro before we get on to our main event, Moderna. So many of us in life sciences have been aware of the cloud for quite a while, and there's actually an array of different segments of the life sciences industry that are running in the cloud today, from agricultural biotechnology to drugs and small molecule medicines, DNA and biologics, as well as approved medical devices and even mobile medical apps. And across all of these segments, there's really some core core scenarios that are moving. You're either building a new cloud application, you're migrating an existing application, maybe from your own data center to the cloud, or you're buying a cloud-ready solution from a partner or another third party. And then, of course, if you need help, there's consultants that are available to assist with that. And we're seeing the cloud being used across the entire life cycle of medicinal products. It's come a long way in the short time, and really we've seen examples of virtually every kind of GXP system running in the cloud in some form or fashion. I won't linger too long on here, but I just wanted to impress upon you that really we're moving out of this non-regulated back office space into the full spectrum of product development. And now, why would a company choose to run in the cloud? I think that's an important piece of context to understand. And looking at it from the business drivers of the life sciences industry, we see some patterns of they're trying to manage costs and pricing. We all know that pricing and insurance is a huge driver these days, and so that's one of the business aspects that's driving this use of the cloud. Connecting with customers and consumers. As more and more medicine becomes personalized, as digital products are created to augment traditional medicines, there's really a newfound opportunity for medicinal product companies, be they pharma or medical device companies, to directly communicate with their end customers. Of course, meeting regulatory compliance is top of mind, and then also driving clinical innovation. So we need to keep that product pipeline, that medicine pipeline, full in the clinical and the research phase so that we can get those new medicines to the patients that need them. And so this innovation idea of finding new ways to deliver treatments is really a main concern. And then lastly, how do we do all those things and also transform the business and operating models of the industry? So I think these, from a business context, what we're hearing are big drivers. And each of those translates into implications for the IT department. Many of you, if you're in the IT teams today, you know what it's like to have to respond to these changes in business. And really what we see is boiling down to the implications for you are that IT is now in the product portfolio. used to be just a back office and operations function, but now you're at the table when in terms of talking about new digital health products. One example we just saw in the news, of course, was FDA approving the first mobile medical app as a medical device. I think we can all expect more and more new products like that, and so IT now has a seat at that product portfolio discussion. And then, of course, if we want all the benefits of being innovative and transforming our business and operating models, we also need to think about the implications for creating new compliance models. The overall speed of change is increasing, and so we need to adapt our compliance models to handle that new speed of change. Data growth is also accelerating, with a single genomic sequence for a human potentially taking up to 100 gigs of storage space. The more personalized medicines we have, the more real-world evidence systems we're using, the more data growth is accelerating, and so we need to plan for that. Also, personal data and the geographic locations of that data are expanding. So now as digital products and digital solutions become medicinal products, we're collecting personal data from people. We're also seeing opportunities to expand the product offerings from new regions perspective. And so being able to take that into account from an IT team perspective is super important. The acquisitions, partnerships, and licensing projects you're encountering are increasing. So whether it's merger and acquisitions with smaller biotech startups, or maybe the IT supply chain inside a mobile medical app where you have multiple suppliers contributing either web services, APIs, or SDKs, the ability to quickly and completely incorporate those kinds of third-party projects together is really top of mind. And then lastly, of course, the regulatory and cybersecurity needs are multiplying. And because of this geographic expansion, we can expect that the needs are multiplying asynchronously, which means in different regions, you may have different rate of change with the regulatory frameworks incorporating or accommodating cloud and digital health products. So it's really important to understand how the business that we're in also trickles down into the IT team projects that you're working on. With the cloud, there's a lot of opportunities that can help you meet those challenges. Of course, there's the trading capital expense for variable expense, so you no longer need to buy servers yourself when you can rent the capacity of the server and only pay for the capacity that you actually use, not some forecast that you have to plan for. The massive economies of scale, and this isn't just an economic economy of scale, there's also a subject matter expertise economy of scale. With you not having to run non-essential operations like rack and stacking servers, you can focus more of your time and energy on your core business. And AWS can invest in the security and operations that we do across all of our customer base, which you then can take advantage of. Of course, as we talked about that speed of change increasing, and now the speed and agility of responding to that change, the cloud is something that the cloud is perfectly positioned for. And then obviously the idea of going global in minutes on a global platform while also maintaining those local and regional controls that you need to ensure that your data protections are in place. And so here at AWS, we have a lot of experience in this space. We've been serving the life sciences community for over a decade. Starting back when we were in our inception in 2006, we were welcomed by the academic community and the genomics community as a place that they wanted to experiment with sequencing. And since then, we've really, again, expanded across the entire medicinal product life cycle. Today, we have more than 1 million active customers in over 190 countries with a large physical footprint across the world. And that our speed of adding new features is something that we're really offering to customers and hearing back that that's something that they value. Over 2,900 new features and services since our inception. And then, of course, the compliance and assurance programs that we have, really providing you with that assurance that our controls are effective and operating and providing you with visibility into those controls. And through all of that, we've collected a great selection of customers and partners. There's too many to include on this slide, but I wanted to give you a good cross-section of those who are on us today. And really, any kind of workload you can think of, there's probably an example for. These are just some of the customers and partners that are on us today. And what we hear from them isn't that they're just taking advantage of the cloud and benefiting from a technology perspective, but we're hearing that they can actually improve their compliance posture on AWS through our templatized infrastructure capability, where you can create standardized stacks that you can replicate easily with repeatable controls, repeatable testing, and automatic traceability throughout your entire configuration. This quote comes from one of our financial services customers who is in a very highly regulated space, of course, and what we've heard from them is that they actually believe they can achieve a higher level of security in the cloud than they can in their own data centers, and we hear that common refrain across life sciences customers as well. So we have some resources if you're interested in learning more. There's informational resources on our website that can help you build, buy, and migrate your validated systems. Again, we also have an outstanding network of AWS partners like Deloitte, who's joining us today, and others in the technology and consulting space. And there's one other resource that isn't on here yet that's coming soon that I wanted to mention to you, which is we're working on a project for a qualified version of SAP to run on AWS. And if that's something you'd like to learn more about, please contact us. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Roland Smith from Moderna Therapeutics.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of Moderna and how our science and culture enable our digital vision on AWS. I'm going to share some of the challenges we have faced as we strive to become the first digital biotech, and I'm going to present our high-level cloud strategy and the integrated CS3 framework we are developing to help achieve our vision. Many of you may be familiar with the central dogma of molecular biology. Within our bodies, our DNA functions like a hard drive that stores the instructions required to build the materials that we are all made of. Our messenger RNA, like software, reads our DNA and instructs our cells on how to make specific proteins. The proteins are the hardware in our bodies which enable our metabolic processes to operate. Where traditional biologics focuses on the complex processes required to manufacture a single protein, at Moderna we are focused on engineering messenger RNA, the software of life. With just code changes, we are able to allow the body to make many different proteins while maintaining a consistent platform-based manufacturing process. This modular approach in thinking is built into our culture and has helped to accelerate our digital vision on AWS. 5 years into our journey, we have significantly expanded our pipeline, talent, and partnerships and capital base. In this time, we have grown our pipeline to 16 programs in 3 therapeutic areas with 7 medicines and clinics. Since our inception, Moderna has been a fully cloud-based company, and the flexibility and speed of AWS has helped to disrupt some traditional paradigms. As an example, leveraging cloud-based computing, we were able to progress our Zika vaccine from an idea to a phase 1 clinical trial in only 12 months. This rapid growth has been enabled by our talented employees. With our relentless use of analytics and artificial intelligence, we have been able to quickly onboard new talent and empower teams with contextualized data and insights to drive innovation. In the past 5 years, we have grown our partnerships to include 3 industry-leading partners, as well as 3 not-for-profit partners. As we have expanded our partners and portfolio, we've been able to scale rapidly and effectively by integrating our cloud-based systems and value streams to eliminate non-value-added work. Finally, we've been able to efficiently deploy our capital through the relentless application of robotics and automation to ensure consistent, repeatable processes. As you can see, Moderna is using and testing a robust set of services in either discovery or preclinical operations, and we're in the process of applying the same tools and knowledge to support regulated workloads. Using computing services, we have been able to rapidly scale from 0 to nearly 100 server and RDS database instances within the past 6 months. Using automation, we're able to turn down workloads during off hours to optimize our costs. Using storage and S3, we are creating a growing repository of contextualized, unstructured, analytical testing data, which we will use in the future to support big data efforts. RDS and database services have allowed us to have high availability data across multiple zones without requiring specialized database skill sets. Using the messenger services and Amazon IoT buttons, we are currently piloting the automation of our Kanban material management process in manufacturing. This pilot, using something similar to the dash buttons you may have at home, represents the fusion of AWS innovation with traditional validated SAP interfaces. Finally, leveraging AppStream, we have been able to quickly deploy specialized thick clients via a thin client interface in a matter of days without the traditional infrastructure overhead. Unlike traditional pharma trying to be more nimble, Moderna faces the somewhat unique challenge of how to scale our agile cloud-based delivery model to support GMP-regulated workflows. This has come with some challenges. Lack of understanding was the first challenge we faced. Users, vendors, and partners in quality are all beginning to embrace the cloud, but we each spoke a different language. To overcome the challenge, we had to partner to create a common language, some of which I will share in a future slide. Another major challenge was maintaining data integrity. The cloud revolution is happening at a time when data integrity is gaining more scrutiny. To help build a foundation to ensure data integrity, we have had to focus on understanding data flows, system of record, and avoiding silos, both data silos as well as organizational silos. Understanding our system and data flows has also helped us to ensure business continuity. There's rarely a meeting about implementing a new system on AWS when someone doesn't ask what happens if the cloud goes down. Understanding our failure modes has allowed us to navigate these concerns and to build adaptable solutions. Finally, one of our biggest challenges has been both deploying and sustaining a validated state. In an ever-changing technology landscape, the new tools available are making it easier and easier to deploy new solutions, but maintaining the validated state is essential and is complicated by the rapid pace of change. To deploy and sustain solutions in a validated state, we realized we needed an integrated CSV framework built on a single quality manual. Our close partnership with quality was critical to our success, so we decided that foregoing a separate IT QMS would strengthen the partnership and foster greater shared understanding. The application layer is the compiled code that supports what the business layer does, and the component layer are the building blocks critical to delivering the business layer. By clearly differentiating the most important components to the validated state as we design the solution and understanding risk, we are able to ensure that the most rigor is applied to the right changes, and we are able to make the lower risk changes easier and faster. The cloud layer includes all of the AWS services that support the entire technology stack. With our layers defined, we drafted a series of policies and procedures with clear boundaries and touch points. We have strived to share as many procedures as possible with data integrity and risk management at the core. Understanding how data integrity is applied at each layer has actually accelerated our deployment of systems. And focus on risk has helped us differentiate potential impacts to operations from impacts to data or regulatory compliance. In order to ensure that business and technology change are comprehensively understood, we chose to operate under one holistic change policy. One common view and language for change has allowed us to more quickly navigate our changes. Finally, in order to deploy and sustain each layer, we have delivered clear sets of deliverables with a focus on flexibility and, more importantly, value. We need to understand how our value streams and integrations interconnect but we have been mindful to avoid overcomplicating documents in a way that can slow change. Our framework is a work in progress, with each procedure continually evolving. I generally think of the framework like IKEA furniture. It is usually good to leave some of the bolts loose and incrementally tighten as we become sure we've got things right. In addition to clearly defining our physical layers of technology, we've had to define our logical layers so that we can ensure that data flows and failure modes are well understood. This diagram represents a high-level overview of our GMP supporting platforms, with green representing AWS, blue representing SaaS-based solutions, and purple representing site-hosted applications. First, on the bottom, at the control layer, we have needed to add some physical infrastructure to enable the real-time characterization of products and facilities. The boxes with gradients represent hybrid cloud solutions. A key guiding principle for the design of our new Norwood plant is to be able to control processes in a compliant state and to be able to bring processes to a safe hold state in the event that there is a technology disruption. This principle has required both that we design robust systems and allow flexibility for empowered site-based operators. Within our production layer, we are enabling many traditional systems such as LIMS, MES, and our chromatography data management system on the AWS platform. Our flexible design allows such systems as MES to maintain and pass key processing parameters down to smart site-based equipment for execution while minimizing operational risk. The office layer allows our strategic planning and operational view of data for decision making and many daily operations, including warehouse and material management. SAP is central to the strategic layer and was released for GMP use on AWS last week. Working with AWS and our partners, we were able to deploy and qualify production planning, materials management, and quality management within 5 months, including 10 validated interfaces for go live. Dell Boomi, hosted on AWS, has been a big part of our integrated digital strategy. We have operationalized system integration and integration management with flexible, compliant processes that allow us to deploy new qualified integrations in less than 1 week. This allows us to tie together both our production layer systems as well as our office layer systems, both on AWS and within our SaaS offerings. Behind this picture is a more detailed diagrams that allow us to maintain and understand our ecosystems. As we continue to build out our landscape to support our continued growth, analytics is becoming an increasing focus, and I look forward to sharing our progress on that in the future. With that, I thank you, and I hand the presentation back to Chris.
Nice. Thank you very much, Roland. That was great. And for those who are attending, we will be placing another poll question on the screen. If you could please respond to that. And then later in the session, we'll be providing the metrics back to you on what your poll responses look like. Nice. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So I'd like to introduce some of the partners that we have with us today. And kicking things off, I believe, is Joe Miles, who's the Global Vice President for Life Sciences at SAP. Joe?
Thanks, Chris. So it's great to be here and great to hear about some of the innovations that Moderna has really highlighted, and I think the opportunity that resides in an industry that has historically struggled with innovation and change. To hear the team at Moderna talk about their ability to have a more flexible approach and a more innovative approach to kind of release themselves from some of the confines of the GXP environment is really exciting. And I think it's directly related to what AWS has done in giving them the flexibility to not only to adapt and change in an ever-evolving environment, but to be able to do that in ways of whether it's ramping up kind of time to value and with training environments and test environments with rapid pace, and be able to just to respond to the business and the changes that are evolving, I think is really exciting. And it's something that I think we are seeing a lot more of, from the enterprise perspective, where it's not easy, and as we all know from a life science perspective, to operate in a regulated environment. Changing is a real challenge, and I think we've all heard the stories of someone not touching their production environment for years on end, 5 to 10 years, for concerns over potentially having to revalidate things. And I think what this more open approach, this more dynamic approach, is not just simply around AWS, but certainly there's a lot of processes around this as well, but it certainly is allowing and enabling a much more dynamic environment, which is really exciting, I think, in terms of providing the organizations an opportunity to fail fast and to move the organization forward. So it's an exciting time.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Next on our list, Nathan Wallace from Turbot. He's the CEO and founder of Turbot. Nathan?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and it's great to be here. So, at Turbot, what we're interested in is the bit in the middle. So, application teams are always trying to work out how we're going to run our heavily regulated app or even our highly agile app in this cloud environment. And way down the bottom, you've got that Amazon cloud with all these amazing capabilities. We saw Moderna using all sorts of mixture of Amazon services. At Turbot, we're obsessed with solving the piece in the middle. How should your cloud be designed and configured and operated to give that agility to those application teams, or that control over their infrastructure to those application teams, while ensuring that your organization is still in control of the overall picture? How do we keep it safe? How do we ensure all our data is encrypted? How do we make sure every time they create an S3 bucket that the data in there is safe, right? And Turbot's really focused on solving that piece, right, between the applications, whether they're compliant or smaller, and also the cloud, right? And in particular, what we're seeing is there's a huge change, right, that comes as you move to the cloud with these applications. Change management moves from the infrastructure layer a lot more to the application layer. The application itself starts to manage its own infrastructure. That's best practice. That's how you do auto scaling. That's how you do high availability. That's how you make sure things are growing and in control, right? But with that, change is basically we've moved to a world of software-defined infrastructure. With that, we've got to completely rethink how we're going to tackle security, compliance, operations, all those pieces that were traditionally based around human review. They're more and more outdated. They can't keep up with the pace when an application itself controls its own infrastructure. That application may choose to move quickly or slowly, right? But either way, the application is now in control of that infrastructure. And the challenge now is trying to work out how do we give them that level of control while keeping it all wrapped up. If we wrap up that cloud in a whole bunch of traditional processes, security reviews, etc., we just took a 5-minute server and turned it back into the traditional 6-week server that everybody knows and loves who's worked in a large enterprise. So we have to work out a way to capture that agility, and keep all of that real time. And we think that really means moving to a world of software-defined operations. So at Turbot, we actually work with many of the world's largest pharmaceutical or biotech companies to solve this problem, right? And what we do and what we recommend to them and what our software does automatically is basically a series of steps to really set up that environment and maintain it in an ongoing fashion. We think it's critical that you lock down that environment to get control of it. We think it's really then important to make sure that you constantly maintain control, putting guardrails around that so you're constantly enforcing your policies, understanding when you're drifting away from that configuration, and fixing those things in real time, literally seconds after they might change. As part of that with cloud, you can really start to isolate your workloads. Every application can have full network isolation. We can give separation of access and change control to each of them very easily in this world. We just have to rethink it as more like virtual data centers rather than a large infrastructure managed data center which has a whole lot of applications together. As we split up and isolate those apps, we can then use identity and access to do segregation of duties or assign responsibility in that environment, whether that's over cost, change, audit trail, permissions. We can see everything that's going on if we've configured and managed that environment correctly. With that, we can then finally, we've separated out our applications from each other at an infrastructure level, and we can start to move away from traditional infrastructure change control and move into a world of application managed change control. Heavily regulated SAP applications can move with the level of pace they're comfortable with, while other systems, development environments, etc., can move with a lot more agility next to them because of that multi-tenant power of the cloud. And then we can just keep accelerating that. So the bottom line here from a Turbot point of view, what we see is happening in this environment is that really you've got to think about this software-defined infrastructure as needing software-defined operations. Nothing else will give the velocity to those application teams while ensuring you've got that level of control that those life sciences applications require. You can have hundreds of automated security, compliance, network, identity and access controls literally implemented in software out of the box and running real time across that environment. So your thought to leave everyone on the call with is, as you're thinking of making that move, don't just think about your app, don't just think about the power of the cloud, think about that messy middle and how you're going to sort of try and plug that up with your own sort of software-defined operations approach.
Great, thanks, Nathan. And Michael Crothers joining us today from Deloitte. Michael?
Thank you, Chris. At Deloitte, we've had the privilege and opportunity to serve many of our life sciences clients across the full development and delivery life cycle of cloud use cases across both GXP and the non-GXP landscape. From ideation of initial concepts around solutions through development and, of course, deployment. And where there are solutions supporting those GXP processes and workloads, we also offer some of our services around GXP compliance strategy and also through the qualification and validation where needed, as well as some of our cybersecurity risk strategies. Additionally, our strategic alliance with AWS has allowed us to collaborate on delivering the most effective use of the AWS platform, as well as helping our clients understand what controls need to be in place to satisfy GXP requirements. And so with the focus of our discussion today really around GXP workloads and what those controls might look like in the cloud, I'd like to offer up a perspective on some of the trends we're seeing in the industry with our experience delivering directly with some of our clients. And so through this work with our clients, as well as some of the industry forums within the life sciences industry that we participate in, specifically within the space of IT quality and compliance, a common question that comes up is, what controls are required for hosting GXP solutions within the cloud, and how do we best enable those required controls with our cloud vendor? And I find that the common underlying question that the IT quality assurance groups really face is how to best demonstrate compliance to both internal auditors or even external inspectors. And they're asking the question, how can I control something that I don't feel I have full control over? Which can sometimes be quite a hurdle for some of the companies and some of these quality organizations to overcome, especially when taking an approach of trying to apply their traditional IT quality management system controls that they use for their in-house hosted GXP applications, and then attempting to apply those same controls either directly to their cloud vendor or the cloud platform that they're implementing, like AWS. And in fact, this is really the most common mistake that we see. The reality is that it's not required to impose all of those same internal controls that you have as a regulated company to the letter to your cloud vendor. Cloud adoption for these GXP use cases really requires an understanding of this underlying technology, as well as the associated controls, which controls are managed by your vendor versus your organization, and then of course the roles and responsibilities between the organizations that follow. This doesn't mean that you need to create or separate a different IT quality management system or a different set of IT governance procedures. Actually, as you heard Roland highlight in his approach earlier, he and his team actually integrated their cloud qualification approach into their existing framework, working closely with their quality organization. So we typically recommend a risk-based approach taking into consideration the data that you might be hosting on the cloud and the intended use of the solution as it relates to the GXP process that you might be enabling. And consider establishing a regulated cloud strategy that tiers the level of controls based on the risk of the solution. This will really help facilitate the review and the discussions with your cloud vendors, such as AWS, to understand where some of those controls might be covered, and then others that you as the regulated company or responsibility that you must maintain. The key is really to focus on the risks that matter most. For example, and I'll usually refer to these as the big three risk categories: security, change control, data integrity. Again, you saw Roland highlight those specific areas and some of the challenges that his team had to address as well. And not getting stuck in trying to just check a box that might not apply for the cloud platforms or solutions that you're hosting on those platforms. Now, the good news is we are seeing a trend in recent years of many more GXP use cases being implemented in the cloud across the full life sciences value chain, from clinical through manufacturing through to commercial. So, for example, sample management solutions, patient service programs, even adverse event reporting. In fact, Deloitte ourselves has launched a pharmacovigilance and safety analytics solution, which is an evidence-based platform for safety intelligence and data insights called Converge Health Safety. This is a solution that is hosted on the AWS platform, and it's a solution we provide as a service to our clients. So we're really experiencing a lot of the same qualification and validation areas that need to be addressed by life sciences organizations like yourself. Now, the acceleration of this trend that we're seeing around the GXP use cases, we believe can be attributed to a convergence of life sciences organizations, so companies like yourself, and the quality and regulatory functions gaining a better understanding of cloud technology. Cloud has been here for a while. Obviously, companies, even quality units, are getting more comfortable with it and really demystifying the risks related to hosting these GXP solutions, as well as cloud vendors themselves gaining a better understanding of how to work with life sciences companies, and then the related controls that they might need to adhere to. And that's really the key takeaway of where we're seeing this trend really amplify. With that, there's obviously a lot more trends we could speak to. Want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. So Chris, I'll hand it back to you.
Nice. Thank you very much, Michael. And we've got a Q&A session lined up here, and thank you for everyone who's been submitting questions in the chat window. Please continue to do that. Before we jump into that, I think we wanted to provide you with some visibility into the poll results. So we had 3 questions. These are the results from the first question. Pretty interesting, good mix there. So good to see that a lot of you have at least one prod workload in the cloud. That's cool. Can we see the results for the second one? There we go. Nice. That's good. And then how about that third question we asked? Okay. Yep. Nice. Well, thank you for everyone who joined in, especially, the compliance folks. I'm really glad that to see you engaged on this topic. I think it's really important that the full team effort, IT, business, and compliance really come together on this. So we've got some questions already from the chat window. Let's see. Let's start with, how about, okay, maybe I'll cue this one over to Michael. And this question is about the other parts of compliance with respect to digital medical products. So we're primarily talking about GXP compliance in this session, but the question is around how can partners assist with regional regulations like GDPR, HIPAA, and data residency and data processor controller relationships. And in particular, the question is around the Nordic countries, but I think this is something that's kind of a global topic. So could you just, from the consulting perspective, Michael, could you maybe speak a little bit about, either some of the patterns you're seeing or respond to this question around data residency and data processor controls outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Chris. And I'll maybe address even the first part of that question, which is outside of GXP, when you think about various other global regulations like HIPAA, data privacy, et cetera. The reality is that the common risks that we talk about, even for GXP and that we talked about today, actually apply, generally speaking, to a lot of the local and global regulations. What I mean by that is if you think about security, a lot of the same risks for data privacy also apply around security for GXP or other regulations that might be top of mind for you. So there's actually benefit and efficiencies to taking a full look and a single lens at all of the various regulatory requirements that you might need to adhere to for any particular solution, and applying those risks and the related risk controls holistically. I think, again, thinking about common mistakes or trends in common mistakes in that area that we see is when individual groups within the organization, between compliance, quality, et cetera, look at their small piece of compliance and try to address their own controls, you ultimately get a little bit of a mismatch and actually drive a lot of inefficiencies in how you address those areas. So I hope that answers the question, Chris. Yep.
Yep. Thank you. And for the person who asked that, please feel free to ask any clarifying questions there in the chat panel. We do have another question I'd like to go to around blockchain. And the question itself isn't specific to SAP. It's about what role, if any, will blockchain play in the new control environment in the life sciences vertical. And I'm not sure, Joe, if from SAP's perspective, do you have any maybe insight into what, if any, role you see blockchain playing in the industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting, an interesting question. We actually just had a customer session last week, and blockchain was an integral topic of discussion. I mean, blockchain right now is currently at the peak of the hype cycle, right? So blockchain can solve just about every problem in the world today, according to a lot of its press. But we find it to be a very interesting topic. It has a lot of focus that you read about is around some of really around traceability and track and trace and so forth. As a technology, it's still, I would describe it a bit as a blunt object still. It's not real precise, but it does have some very, I think, interesting capabilities, and we're looking at it as such. The authentication and the integrity of the data makes it very intriguing for things like clinical trials and ensuring you have an unalterable record for those trials and have audit trails that could not be altered. Certainly around counterfeit, that has implications on counterfeiting. It has broader implications around really any asset that's in the field. So we're looking at it in a variety of levels. It is an open source solution, so as you start to think about things relative to regulatory compliance and software validation, there may be some implications there, but it's still validatable and can be brought into the traditional processes. But we're seeing it as a really interesting piece of capability and technology that we're using to extend, enhance, and really bring a different dimension to the SAP enterprise application space.
Nice. Thanks, Joe. That's pretty timely that you had that session last week. Let's see. We've got a question on dedicated instances, and are dedicated instances required to run regulated workloads? And I'm wondering, maybe Nathan from Turbot, since you guys are kind of in that middle layer, do you have any visibility into patterns that you're seeing with usage of dedicated instances amongst your customers?
Yeah, Chris, so I mean, definitely dedicated instances are a part of the meeting of compliance requirements, right? Because AWS will offer more guarantees around the dedicated instances. I mean, dedicated instances, of course, what they do is mean that nobody else is sharing the same hypervisor with you, which adds some extra security controls, etc., which then AWS is more happy to stand behind. We see people using those, but very, very much on in cases where they really have to meet that requirement per their agreements with AWS. In general, otherwise, people are doing a lot more work on on demand or spot or that sort of combination.
Nice, thanks. And I'll chime in a little bit on that one too. We have our HIPAA BAA program, which many of our GXP and life sciences customers take advantage of as well. We no longer require the dedicated instance usage. And really what we're seeing is companies kind of taking a case-by-case look at whether or not to use dedicated instance. There's nothing from the regulatory perspective that I'm aware of that would require that. Really, it's around traceability, which you still have the traceability of with just regular instances. So I think from our perspective, it's really kind of a case-by-case and not really driven specifically by regulatory requirements. Maybe from Roland from Moderna, we've got a question around how AWS is able to maintain a better cyber risk solution than on-premises. And I guess the first part of my answer, I'd like to give that, Roland, maybe if you could chime in with some examples after I respond from Moderna's perspective. And from what we're hearing, a lot of the security controls of your application and your data are within the customer area of responsibility. So as an AWS user, you need to configure those security solutions. And part of what we hear that makes it easier in the cloud is the idea of software-defined infrastructure, allowing you to create repeatable, templatized infrastructure while also creating automated tests. And those tests could be from a quality perspective to ensure, an object that you move somewhere, you could test it after it's there to make sure that the checksum is the same, as simple as that. Or you could also do a security test to make sure encryption is turned on. And maybe you could have that be an action-triggered test so that if an object is edited, you can rerun that test again. So that's, I think, one small example of how we're hearing customers are achieving a higher level of security in their solutions. But maybe, I don't know, Roland, from Moderna's perspective, can you speak to any of the cybersecurity as far as it in any of the practices that you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not my core strength, but I think that having servers on AWS achieves two things. First, it's almost like neutral territory. So rather than having an internal data center, which it comes with its own vulnerabilities, we're putting it in the cloud, which protects it both from us and from the rest of the world. And I think it's something that we've had a lot of discussions about as we've been deploying things, is leveraging external firewalls, having the right network design, and then employing a lot of the AWS specific security settings. Those in some ways create some operational challenges, but in the end, I mean it's definitely a hardened third-party platform that is battle tested, better than certainly what we have the capability to do internally.
Nice, thanks. We're going to have a lot of questions here. I think we will have some follow-up with folks. I wish we had, all the time to answer them in this session, but we've got time for a couple more questions. And then any of those that we don't get to, we'll follow up by email. We've got another one about validation, and maybe Michael, I'll kick this one over to you. Is there a different way we need to be thinking about validating cloud solutions for GXP?
Sure, Chris. As far as the general principles for software validation of regulated solutions are concerned, I wouldn't say there is a drastic change. Those principles stay the same. What does change is maybe a little bit of a shift in thinking on how those principles are applied. And I'd say the biggest shift around the validation approach is really around the concepts of installation qualification. So obviously the cloud is very different in that you're not necessarily installing all of the components in-house across the technology stack. So when you try to approach it and you're trying to check the box for covering off those components around installation and any qualification related to that, it's not always going to be the right fit. So you have to think about realistically. So for example, on the AWS platform, there are components of your solution that you're installing, and it's scoping it appropriately and addressing it appropriately from that perspective. The only other piece around validation that I think is actually a benefit for organizations is leveraging some of your vendors' work that they may have done around qualification or validation. And so you don't necessarily need to duplicate what may have already been done and documented by your cloud vendor or your solution vendor, you can actually leverage and reference that to be a little bit more efficient in that process where appropriate as well.
Yep, that makes sense. Let's maybe keep on that from a different partner, Nathan from Turbot. Any perspectives on changing the validation process for cloud solutions?
Yeah, I mean, the key to, of course, the validation process is choosing the level of risk and change for the different levels. I mean, back in the day, we used to all run our own power stations. Of course, we don't do that anymore. We rely on a power grid and we put in appropriate steps there. So the overall framework remains the same, but you've really got to look at that GAMP level 1 and make sure you're making the right choices about what infrastructure you're putting in at that tier. I think the other thing we're seeing is people shifting a bit more away from, the idea of how do I do this at points in time, and instead make sure I'm continuously enforcing or ensuring that I'm meeting those requirements ongoing, right, with a record of anything that happened. Previously, change control was all about like statement of intent. I intend that I will change this in this way, but that didn't necessarily match the exact actions or record. But with cloud, we have like basically full audit trail of everything that ever happened or changed. We can see to the second how that worked on every piece of infrastructure, managing that through. And it gives us a lot more power to really understand how that environment is operating and managing ongoing. So we can be careful about the quality, about our intended changes, but more than that, we can more easily trace that through with the actual changes that happen in the environment through a real-time way.
Great. And maybe let's keep on this topic because I think we've got a couple other questions around it. And so it looks like there's a lot of interest. And Joe from SAP, any perspective from SAP's perspective or your perspective on how validation in the cloud is different?
Well, I don't think I would differ too much from what was said earlier. I mean, I think the principles are still the same. We still have to take a risk-based approach. From an enterprise perspective, the cloud does present technically some different scenarios. Ultimately, the process itself doesn't really change all that much. I think the key is how do we continue to focus on enabling a more dynamic and robust kind of environment and perspective. And I think use of standardized processes, single instances wherever possible to minimize the amount of effort, but also leveraging global processes and harmonizing is a great way of trying to mitigate a lot of those issues. And irrespective of if it's in the cloud or if it's on premise or wherever it might reside, is a challenge. I think the reality of public cloud is that lots of iterations and a lot of new releases can significantly complicate your environment if you're using a public cloud solution for GXP process areas, and that's just a reality of the marketplace. But I think as we continue to get smarter and faster and more precise with our capabilities as well as the processes, it's able to minimize some of that going forward.
That makes sense. Well, I think it looks like we're going to have a lot of emailing to do after the session, so we'll close it out there. I'd like to thank everyone who attended and, of course, the partners who joined us today and Moderna as well. And if you'd like to follow up with us and learn more after the webinar, please reach out. We've got a page set up with some additional information as well as a contact point. And thank you again for attending, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thanks.